Laura Makin-Isherwood, of course, who is in Cornwall. The three-day summit of leaders of the world's 7 richest nations has officially come to an end. We are now going to cross to our correspondent, Laura Makin-Isherwood, who is in Cornwall in United Kingdom. Laura, a very good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. We have seen protests, we have seen pledges, bold pledges, in fact, trips waiver, trips waiver on the agenda, capacity building and also capability building, particularly in vaccine productions. There's a lot of other issues that have been highlighted and explored. Can you wrap up what transpired today?
Yeah, well, today we're supposed to be focusing on climate change, on sustainability, on ensuring that environmental issues at the moment are really tackled. But of course, there are plenty of announcements that have come out in this communique about that, including a £500 million pledge from the United Kingdom to help protect coastal ecosystems and try to tackle unsustainable fishing methods in the likes of Ghana and Indonesia. There's also going to be investment in or there was more detail about that sort of counter to the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, a sustainable green alternative from the West, money that's going to be plugged into green infrastructure projects across Africa there. So we got a bit more from that. But of course, in President Cyril Ramaphosa's press conference this evening, he wanted to speak about the progress that had been made, the fact that South Africa had been brought to the table with G7 nations. And he said that his message that he has brought to the G7 has been heard. Of course, his big push was, as you say, about the TRIPS waiver alongside India, both nations trying to push for that. And while that hasn't quite been agreed here, instead G7 leaders agreeing to donate a total of 1 billion vaccine doses across the world to countries that have little access to them at the moment. He does say that that TRIPS waiver is the best way he feels to get the world vaccinated. So I wouldn't be surprised if we hear more about that in the coming days, particularly in discussions with the World Trade Organization.
Laura, you spoke about climate change and environmental issues, being one of the top issues to be discussed today, obviously coinciding with some of the other more pertinent issues at hand. I just want to get your overview of the weekend at large, looking at all the issues that have been put forth. Obviously, from here on to, we see Biden going to meet with NATO and Putin, COP26 also coming up later on in the year. How is this weekend's unfoldings going to affect what we can expect, particularly surrounding the economy recovery and also vaccination processes that have been announced?
Well, it's all about working together, isn't it? And you talk about NATO there. Of course, in the last few years, we've had a lot of turbulence, haven't we, with Donald Trump heading up US meetings there. We know that NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, we heard that clip that Sophie threw to just a few minutes ago. He's probably quite excited, I'd say, to have Joe Biden here now, a very calm influence, it seems, and a president that's really pushing for unity and to try to rebuild an alliance that has been quite shaky. We didn't know what Donald Trump was ever going to ask for in those meetings. He came up with demands for extra cash, stronger burden sharing, trying to push the weight of those costs on other nations that perhaps didn't have the same level of GDP as America did in isolation. But Joe Biden, it seems, wants to bring those groups back together. And I think that that's a message that continues across other aspects, other issues too. Climate change, of course, the G7 leaders here committing money to try to help developing nations get on board and meet emissions targets, coming up with carbon reducing plans, cutting the use of coal, and that can only be done with support from the G7. So this move, I think, and this feeling of unity around that table and inviting the 4 guest nations, South Africa, India, South Korea and Australia, is really vital because they are emerging economies, developing economies. They are getting stronger and will be important moving forward with trade too. So as we come out of this pandemic, this is essential for these talks to continue to build an agenda that is pushing through to the future and to ensure that the economy globally can survive and recover.
Laura, let's conclude this conversation by looking at the future of geopolitics at large. How is this going to impact the way we look at growth in the future?
That's a very good question, isn't it? Because for the last year or so, we have not been in any kind of normal scenario. Domestic product within each country has been escalating, dipping. There's been massive crashes, of course, and we just don't really know what's going to happen. Here in the UK, the Chancellor and the UK government have been plugging a lot of cash into trying to keep businesses afloat. They've been offering money to people and putting them on furlough, as it's called here, so that they can still maintain their job with a sort of proportion of their salary. But this is a big situation that the whole world is going to have to contend with. So as we move forward, it's all a big question mark. We have to see, and I know that the G7 here have been pushing towards having a green industry as their focus, trying to promote green jobs so they can tackle the two issues simultaneously in terms of getting people back into jobs and boosting that economy, as you say, but also tackling climate change at the same time, because these are two huge issues that both need addressing, and if you can combine the two, then that's probably good news for all, isn't it?
Absolutely. Laura Makin-Isherwood, thank you very much for joining us. Laura was just giving us an update of what transpired throughout the weekend as the G7 summit has come to an end.